The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Royal Gendarmerie of Canada, colloquially known as the Mounties, and internally as the Force, is both a federal and a national police force of Canada. The RCMP provides law enforcement at a federal level in Canada, and also on a contract basis to the 3 territories, 8 of Canada's provinces, more than 150 municipalities, 600 aboriginal communities, and 3 international airports. Overview. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police was formed in 1920 by the merger of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police with the Dominion Police. The former was originally named the Northwest Mounted Police, and was given the royal prefix by King Edward VII in 1904. Much of the present-day organization's symbolism has been inherited from its days as the NWMP and RNWMP, including the distinctive red serge uniform, paramilitary heritage, and mythos as a frontier force. The RCMP GRC wording is protected under the Trademarks Act. As Canada's national police force, the RCMP is primarily responsible for enforcing federal laws throughout Canada, while general law and order, including the enforcement of the Criminal Code and applicable provincial legislation, is constitutionally the responsibility of the provinces and territories. Larger cities commonly form their own municipal police departments. The 2 most populous provinces, Ontario and Quebec, maintain provincial forces: the Ontario Provincial Police and Sûreté du Québec. The other 8 provinces contract policing responsibilities to the RCMP. The RCMP provides frontline policing in those provinces under the direction of the provincial governments. When Newfoundland joined the Confederation in 1949, the RCMP entered the province and absorbed the then Newfoundland Ranger Force, which patrolled most of Newfoundland's rural areas. The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary patrols urban areas of the province. In the territories, the RCMP is the sole territorial police force. Many municipalities throughout Canada contract to the RCMP. Thus, the RCMP polices at the federal, provincial, and municipal level. It is the only police force of any sort in several areas of Canada. The RCMP is responsible for an unusually large breadth of duties. Under the federal mandate, the RCMP police throughout Canada, including Ontario and Quebec. Federal operations include enforcing federal laws including commercial crime, counterfeiting, drug trafficking, border integrity, organized crime, and other related matters, providing counter-terrorism and domestic security, providing protection services for the monarch, Governor-General, Prime Minister, the families and residences, and other ministers of the Crown, visiting dignitaries, and diplomatic missions, and participating in various international policing efforts. Under provincial and municipal contracts, the RCMP provides frontline policing in all areas outside of Ontario and Quebec that do not have an established local police force. There are detachments located in small villages in the far north, remote First Nations reserves, and rural towns, but also larger cities such as Surrey, British Columbia. There are support units investigate for their own detachments, and smaller municipal police forces. Investigations include major crimes, homicides, forensic identification, collision forensics, police dogs, emergency response teams, explosives disposal, and undercover operations. Under its National Police Services branch, the RCMP supports all police forces in Canada via the Canadian Police Information Centre, Criminal Intelligence Service Canada, Forensic Science and Identification Services, Canadian Firearms Program, and the Canadian Police College. The RCMP Security Service was a specialized political intelligence and counterintelligence branch with national security responsibilities, replaced by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in 1984, following revelations of illegal covert operations relating to the Quebec separatist movement. CSIS is not part of the RCMP, but is its own entity. History. Founding Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald first began planning a permanent force to patrol the Northwest Territories after the Dominion of Canada purchased the territory from the Hudson's Bay Company. Reports from Army officers surveying the territory led to the recommendation that a mounted force of between 100 to 150 mounted riflemen could maintain law and order. The Prime Minister first announced the force as the Northwest Mounted Rifles. However, officials in the United States raised concerns that an armed force along the border was a prelude to a military build-up. Macdonald then renamed the force the Northwest Mounted Police when formed in 1873. The force added "Royal" to its name in 1904. It was merged with the Dominion Police, the main police force for all points east of Manitoba, in 1920 and was renamed as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The new organization was charged with federal law enforcement in all the provinces and territories, and immediately set about establishing its modern role as protector of Canadian national security, as well as assuming responsibility for national counterintelligence. As part of its national security and intelligence functions, the RCMP was responsible for infiltrating any ethnic or political groups that were considered to be dangerous to Canada's existing order. This included the Communist Party of Canada, but also a variety of minority cultural and nationalist groups. The force was also deeply involved in immigration matters, and especially deportations of suspected radicals. They were especially concerned with Ukrainian groups, both nationalist and socialist. The Chinese community was also targeted because of a perceived link to opium dens. Historians estimate that fully 2% of the Chinese community was deported between 1923 and 1932, largely under the provisions of the Opium and Narcotics Drugs Act. Besides the RCMP's new responsibilities in intelligence, drugs enforcement, and immigration, the force also provided assistance to numerous other federal agencies, such as enforcing the residential school system for Aboriginal children. In 1935, the RCMP, collaborating with the Regina Police Service, crushed the On-to-Ottawa trek by sparking the Regina riot, in which one city police officer and one protester were killed. The trek, which had been organized to call attention to the abysmal conditions in relief camps, therefore failed to reach Ottawa, but nevertheless had profound political reverberations. The RCMP employed special constables to assist with strike-breaking in the interwar period. For a brief period in the late 1930s, a volunteer militia group, the Legion of Frontiersmen, were affiliated with the RCMP. Many members of the RCMP belonged to this organization, which was prepared to serve as an auxiliary force. In later years, special constables performed duties such as policing airports and, in certain Canadian provinces, the courthouses. In 1932, men and vessels of the Preventive Service National Revenue were absorbed, creating the RCMP Marine Section. The acquisition of the RCMP schooner St. Rock facilitated the first effective patrol of Canada's Arctic territory. It was the first vessel to navigate the Northwest Passage from west to east, the first to navigate the passage in one season, the first to sail either way through the passage in one season, and the first to circumnavigate North America. Counterintelligence work was moved from the RCMP's Criminal Investigation Department to a specialized intelligence branch, the RCMP Security Service. In 1939, post-war on April 1, 1949, Newfoundland joined in full confederation with Canada and the Newfoundland Ranger Force amalgamated with the RCMP. Following the 1945 defection of Soviet cipher clerk Igor Guzenko and his revelations of espionage, the RCMP Security Service implemented measures to screen out subversive elements from the public sector. Queen Elizabeth II approved in Regina, Saskatchewan on July 4, 1973, a new badge for the RCMP, in recognition of which the force presented the sovereign with a tapestry rendering of the new design. In the late 1970s, revelations surfaced that the RCMP Security Service force had in the course of their intelligence duties engaged in crimes such as burning a barn and stealing documents from the separatist party QUE Acute BE Acute COS, and other abuses. This led to the Royal Commission of Inquiry into certain activities of the RCMP, better known as the MacDonald Commission, named for the presiding judge, Mr. Justice David Cargill MacDonald. The Commission recommended that the force's intelligence's duties be removed in favor of the creation of a separate intelligence agency, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. ODNIRA. In 1993, the Special Emergency Response Team were transferred to the Canadian Forces, creating a new unit called Joint Task Force 2. JTF-2 inherited some equipment and SERT's former training base near Ottawa. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police have been involved in training and logistically supporting the Haitian National Police since 1994, a controversial matter in Canada considering allegations of widespread human rights violations on the part of the HNP. Some Canadian activist groups have called for an end to the RCMP training. The RCMP has also provided training overseas in Iraq and other peacekeeping missions. The suspected driver of the reconnaissance vehicle involved in the Cobar Towers bombing fled to Canada, where he was arrested by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the winter of 1997, and was extradited to the United States. On March 3, 2005, 4 RCMP officers were fatally shot during an operation to recover stolen property and investigate a possible marijuana grow-up in Servan. Arrest warrant just outside Mayerthorpe, Alberta. Shooter James Roscoe, 46, then killed himself. It was the single worst multiple killing of RCMP officers since the Northwest Rebellion. One of the 4 Mounties killed had been on the job for only 17 days. The victims were Const. Leonide Nicholas Johnston, 34 Mayerthorpe Detachment, Const. Anthony Fitzgerald Orion Gordon, 28 Whitecourt Town Detachment General Policing and Highway Patrol, Const. Brock Warren Myrol, 29 Mayerthorpe Detachment, Const. Peter Christopher Sheeman, 25 Mayerthorpe Detachment General Policing and Highway Patrol. On July 7, 2006, 2 RCMP officers were shot dead near Mildred, Saskatchewan. The killer Curtis Dagonet, 41, was missing until July 18, when he turned himself in. The victims were Const. Robin Cameron, 29 Spiritwood Detachment, Const. Mark Bordages, 26 Spiritwood Detachment, Dagonet was subsequently convicted of 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder of a third Mountie who arrived shortly after the initial firefight. In 2006, the United States Coast Guard's 9th District and the RCMP began a program called Ship Rider, in which 12 Mounties from the RCMP detachment at Windsor and 16 Coast Guard boarding officers from stations in Michigan ride in each other's vessels. The intent is to allow for seamless enforcement of the international border. On December 6, 2006, RCMP Commissioner Giuliano Zaccardelli resigned 1 day after informing the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security that his earlier testimony about the Ara case was inaccurate. The RCMP had improperly given information to the U.S. that resulted in Ara, a Canadian returning to Montreal via the U.S., being sent to Syria where he was imprisoned for 10 months and tortured into signing a false confession of links to terrorists. Earlier on September 28, 2006, and before the same Commons Committee, Commissioner Zaccardelli had issued a carefully worded public apology to Ara and his family. Mr. Ara, I wish to take this opportunity to express publicly to you and to your wife and to your children how truly sorry I am for whatever part the actions of the RCMP may have contributed to the terrible injustices that you experienced and the pain that you and your family endured. On January 26, 2007, after months of negotiations between the Canadian government and Ara's Canadian legal counsel, Prime Minister Stephen Harper issued a formal apology for any role Canadian officials may have played in what happened to Mr. Ara, Monia Mazai and the family in 2002 and 2003, and announced that Ara would receive $10.5 million settlement for his ordeal and an additional $1 million for legal costs. On October 6, 2007, Constable Christopher John Wooden of Hay River Detachment, Northwest Territories was shot and killed in Hay River while on duty in that community. A nationwide arrest warrant was issued for Emra Bulachi. Bulachi was apprehended on October 12 in Edmonton, Alberta. On October 14, 2007, Robert Jukanski, an immigrant from Poland, died at Vancouver International Airport. Jukanski spoke no English. His mother was waiting for him outside the customs area, but she was told that her son had not arrived, and she went home. No one helped the bewildered man to clear customs. After 8 hours, unable to get assistance, he became agitated. 4 RCMP officers were summoned after he threw a computer and a small table. During his arrest, he was tasered at least twice within 25 seconds of the officer's arrival. After dropping to the floor, he was held down and handcuffed by the officers. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. The incident was videotaped and eventually released to the public. An official inquiry found that the officer's use of the taser was not justified. All 4 officers were charged with perjury regarding the confrontation. 2 were found guilty and sentenced to jail. On November 6, 2007, Constable Doug Scott, 20, was killed in Kimmirut, Nunavut when responding to a report of a possible impaired driver. He had been with the service for only 6 months. In 2007, the RCMP was named Newsmaker of the Year by the Canadian Press. On June 3, 2013, the RCMP renamed its A Division to National Division. On Wednesday, June 4, 2014, around 7:20 p.m., Justin Burke, 24, of Moncton, New Brunswick allegedly shot 5 RCMP officers, mortally wounding 3 and injuring 2 others in the city's Pinehurst subdivision. An image from the Times and Transcript newspaper showed a man dressed in camouflage clothing with a bandana around his forehead, carrying 1 rifle, with a shotgun over his shoulder, and also carrying a backpack. An 8:12 p.m. tweet from the RCMP added that he was still on the run, and that he was to be considered armed and extremely dangerous, not to be approached. Residents were warned to stay indoors and away from windows, and to lock their doors. A separate shooting had also occurred near downtown Jep, New Brunswick, just east of Moncton, according to the newspaper's Twitter feed, but it was not definitively known if the two incidents were connected or not. New Brunswick Premier David Alward said in a statement that he was shocked and saddened by the shootings, and asked residents to heed police warnings. Burke was later apprehended without incident almost 29 hours later. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. The victims were identified as Const. Davis Ross, 32 kill, Const. Fabrice George Gevorden, 45 kill, Const. James Larch, 40 kill, Const. Eric Stéphane J. Dubois, wounded, Const. Marie Darlene Goggin, wounded. History of the RCMP uniform. The RCMP are famous for the distinctive dress uniform, or review order, popularly known as the Red Serge. Quote, "It consists of high-collared scarlet tunic, midnight blue breeches with yellow leg stripe, Sam brown belt with white sidearm lanyard, ox-blood riding boots, brown felt campaign hat with the characteristic Montana crease, and brown gloves. Review order is worn by the mounted troop performing the musical ride, an equestrian drill in which mounted members demonstrate the riding skills and handling of the cavalry lance. On normal duties, the RCMP uses standard police methods, equipment, and uniforms. Horses are still used for such ceremonial operations as escorting the Governor-General's open landau to the opening of Parliament. The red serge tunic that identified initially the NWMP, and later the RNWMP and RCMP, is of the standard British military pattern. The NWMP was originally kitted out from militia stores, resulting initially in several different styles of tunic. Although the style later became standardized, this style was used both to emphasize the British nature of the force and to differentiate it from the blue American military uniforms. The dark blue shoulder straps and collars were added in 1904 when King Edward VII granted the Force Royale status for its service in the Second Boer War, replacing the scarlet facings of the earlier uniform. Currently, RCMP personnel under the rank of inspector wear blue gorget patches on the collar, while officers from inspector to commissioner have solid blue collars, along with blue pointed sleeve cuffs. On top of this jacket was worn a white haversack and white gauntlets, which provided a high visible contrast to the red tunic, but were easily dirty. In the modern dress uniform, these have been replaced with brown leather riding gloves and carrying pouches added to the belt. Initially, the NWMP wore buffer steel gray breeches. Later, dark blue breeches with yellow gold strapping were adopted. Members of the NWMP were known to exchange kit with U.S. cavalry units along the border, and it is suggested that this was the initial source for the breeches. However, blue breeches were considered early on, although with a white strap. Dark blue with yellow gold strapping is another British cavalry tradition, with yellow stripes historically being worn by most cavalry regiments. Dress uniforms. The wide, flat-brimmed Stetson hat was not adopted officially until about 1904. Although the NWMP contingent at Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee wore the Stetson, it was an unofficial item of dress. The primary official summer headdress at the time was the white British Foreign Service helmet, also known as a pith helmet. This was not particularly practical as headdress in the Canadian West, and members wore a Stetson-type hat on patrol and around camp. Sam Steele is often credited with introducing the Stetson-type hat, and when he left the force to command Lord Strathcona's horse and took the regiment to South Africa, he also adopted the Stetson for this unit. For winter, a Canadian military fur wedge cap Busby was worn. Black riding boots were later changed to the modern brown style called Strathcona boots, or informally as high browns. The original cross belts were later changed to the brown Sam Brown type currently worn. The brown color of the boots and belt worn with the red serge come from the individual member applying numerous coats of polish, often during the time in training at Depot Division. Original spurs, referred to as long shank spurs, were solid nickel. Owners of long shank spurs occasionally had the regimental number engraved on the inside. The rowel was sometimes replaced with a U.S. buffalo nickel by the wearer, as using a Canadian coin would be considered defacing the monarch. Long shank spurs have not been issued since 1968. Sidearms are standard now, but were often not worn in the early years. The everyday uniform consists of a gray shirt with dark blue tie, dark blue trousers with gold strapping, regular patrol boots called ankle boots, regular duty equipment, and a regular policeman's style cap. A blue Gore-Tex open collar jacket is worn by members on operational duty, while a dark blue jacket is worn by sergeants major and certain non-commissioned officers usually involved in aspects of recruit training and media relations. Officers wear white shirts and the patrol jacket of blue serge, depending on their duties. Short-sleeved shirts with no tie worn in the summer by all members except officers who wear a tie with the short-sleeved shirt. Winter dress consists of a long-sleeved shirt without tie for all members except officers who wear a tie with the long-sleeved shirt. Depending on the climate of the detachment area, heavier boots, winter coats and a fur cap are worn. In British Columbia, the hat features a black bearskin rim bell. In 1990, Bal Chasing de Hillen became the first Sikh officer in the RCMP to be allowed to wear a turban instead of the traditional Stetson. On March 15, the federal government, despite protests, decided that Sikhs would be permitted to wear turbans while on duty as RCMP officers. Despite ongoing public pressure from groups such as the Association for the Protection of Fur-Bearing Animals, the RCMP decided against using fur but was overruled by the government and continues to use muskrat fur in the winter dress uniform. Royal Canadian Mounted Police Long Service Medal details and history of the medal can be found by clicking on the link. Women in the RCMP. On May 23, 1974, RCMP Commissioner Maurice Nadin announced that the RCMP would accept applications from women as regular members of the force. Troop 17 was the first group of 32 females at Depot in Regina on September 18 and 19, 1974 for regular training. This first all-female troop graduated from Depot on March 3, 1975. After initially wearing different unflattering uniforms, women officers were finally issued the standard RCMP uniforms. Now all officers are identically attired, with two exceptions. The ceremonial dress uniform, or walking out order, for female members has a long, blue skirt and high-heeled slip-on pumps plus small black clutch purse. The second exception is the official maternity uniform for pregnant female officers assigned to administrative duties. The following years saw the first women attain certain positions. 1981, Corporal, Musical Ride. 1987, Foreign Post. 1990, Detachment Commander. 1992, Commissioned Officer. 1998, Assistant Commissioner. From December 15, 2006, to July 2007, Beverly Busson served as Interim Commissioner of the RCMP, making her the first woman to hold the top position in the force. She was replaced by William J. S. Elliott on July 6, 2007, a regiment of dragoons. Although the RCMP is a civilian police force, in 1921, following the service of many of its members during the First World War, King George V awarded the force the status of a regiment of dragoons, entitling it to display the battle honors it had been awarded. Service in wartime. During the Second Boer War, members of the Northwest Mounted Police were given leaves of absence to join the 2nd Battalion, Canadian Mounted Rifles and Strathcona's Horse. The force raised the Canadian Mounted Rifles, mostly from NWMP members, for service in South Africa. For the CMR's distinguished service there, King Edward VII honored the NWMP by changing the name to the Royal Northwest Mounted Police on June 24, 1904. During the First World War, the Royal Northwest Mounted Police conducted border patrols, surveillance of enemy aliens, and enforcement of national security regulations within Canada. However, RNWMP officers also served overseas. On August 6, 1914, a squadron of volunteers from the RNWMP was formed to serve with the Canadian Light Horse in France. In 1918, 2 more squadrons were raised. A squadron for service in France and Flanders and B squadron for service in the Canadian Siberian Expeditionary Force in 1939. No. 1 Provost Company, P Canadian Provost Corps, was raised for service in Europe and served throughout the Second World War as military police. Honours. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police were accorded the status of a regiment of dragoons in 1921, with its first guidon presented in 1935. As a cavalry regiment, the RCMP was entitled to wear battle honors for its war service as well as carry a guidon. The RCMP mounted the King's Life Guard at Horse Guards Parade in 1937 leading up to the coronation of King George VI. Battle honors Northwest Canada 1885. South Africa 1900–02. The Great War, France and Flanders 1918, Siberia 1918–19. The Second World War, Europe, 1939–45. Honorary distinction. The Badge of the Canadian Provost Corps, presented September 21, 1957, at a Parliament Hill ceremony for contributions to the Corps during the Second World War. Legacy. In 1975, the RCMP dedicated a memorial beside the Fred Light Museum in Battleford, Saskatchewan, consisting of a cemetery with gate, cairn and list of honor plaque to the members of the Northwest Mounted Police and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.